Okay, the podium was given me a tad late, so we'll see what I can make of it. The time is quite limited here, but it's a very hard thing to put a project of 5 years into 30 minutes plus 15 minutes of questions. So I'll expect this to take maybe 45 minutes, but I'll take a few questions at the end if this is desirable. Well, Alan Wake, just a quick poll, how many of you have played? Not that many. So, well, a word of warning, there might be a couple of spoilers here, so I hope I don't spoil anyone's experience. The title is The Experience, as you might have noticed from the program. My name is Saku Lehtinen. I'm the art director, have been with Remedy since '97, more or less. I studied architecture. Also, I made my first game in 1989, which hit the shelves. It was called Bloody Afternoon. I apologize. It felt good at the time, the name. But I've been making games 21 years. And obviously I never imagined that back in the day that this could be a real job. But eventually when Max Payne came along and it started seeming feasible that this could be a real job, and I've been an art director in Max Payne 2 and in level design and general design also in Max Payne 1, also directing the cinematics. And art director sometimes means in a game company that you're responsible for the environments or something like that. For us, it's a rather broad term because of the cinematic feel and everything. So basically my job is to take care the audiovisual experience, and that may extend to directing the actors, to making sure that the color schemes are right, or designing some locations, etc. Okay, great. It shouldn't be blue. Let's look at this one. I apologize for the...
One of the most anticipated titles of 2010, Alan Wake will set the bar in cinematic story-driven action.
Possible commercial stuff. This was made for retailers, but
Alan
it's a
Wake
nice
aims to
4-minute
create a unique
encapsulation of
thriller
Alan Wake.
experience. The game seamlessly blends fierce cinematic action with a gripping storyline where things can happen unexpectedly at any time. In order to create the game's unique action, Remedy's goal was to integrate the themes of light and darkness into the combat. The dark presence that threatens Wake is possessing the local townsfolk, and Wake's shadowy enemies seem invincible under the cover of darkness. Before the player can fight them, he first needs to burn away the darkness with light. The use of light as a gameplay element is integrated tightly into the action elements of the game. A handheld flare gives you a momentary safe haven. Flashlights and batteries become an important resource, and even military-grade searchlights can become the key to survival. The gameplay provides variety, with a multitude of enemies, vehicles, poltergeists, and other threats. As the dark presence grows in power, the player will never know what to trust, as even the most innocent, inanimate object can come to life and turn into a threat. In addition to flashlights and weapons, the player will have to cleverly use the environment in order to survive. The action is paced with environmental puzzles, collectibles, and story-driven content.
I'm Barry Wheeler, his agent.
This is where the game's supporting cast comes into play. Like Remedy's Max Payne games, Alan Wake is thick with pop culture references. Among others, Remedy lists Stephen King, Lost, and Twin Peaks as their influences. The game creates a suspenseful, unique thriller experience, only seen to date in film and TV, with the kind of chilling atmosphere, powerful narrative, twists, and cliffhangers that modern audiences have come to expect. The game's lead character, Alan Wake, is a best-selling writer suffering from a writer's block. While vacationing in the idyllic small town of Bright Falls, Wake finds himself trapped in a nightmare. His wife Alice goes missing, and he keeps finding pages from a book he can't even remember writing, and the words are coming true before his eyes. Remedy is also setting the bar high with their soundtrack. The custom-composed cinematic score is combined with the use of licensed songs to create a strong atmosphere. Alan Wake is by far the biggest single-player experience that Remedy has created, and to ensure that every player is provided with an optimal gameplay experience, the game constantly monitors the player's progress and adjusts the difficulty on the fly, maintaining a sweet spot that is suitably challenging. After years of development, the result is a heart-pounding single-player thrill ride that raises the bar in storytelling with a wealth of suspense, twists, and cliffhangers. Coming to Xbox 360, available for pre-order today.
Okay, I'll cut it right there. Again, apologize for all the commercial extra stuff, but I think we had spent a lot of sweat or spent quite a lot of time in doing that. So I thought this would be a good way to 3.5 minutes to quickly encapsulate what Alan Wake is about for the majority of you who have not played the game. So this was originally designed for the retail, and I think you can find this from YouTube as well, but basically this is made for retail, so sort of internal marketing, if you will. But let's talk it like with the PowerPoint and in a more free form fashion. There's in a project which is that long, which takes 5 years, it's 50 people. Okay, there's obviously the question, why did it take so long? Don't games usually take much less time? What went wrong? What's the problem here? Well, very special for Remedy is that we have only one project at a time, and usually people see on a given project, well, let's say a larger company would maybe introduce it 2 years before, but maybe the game has been 1 year, 2 year, God knows how long time it has been in pre-production before that. So the marketing and sort of announcement comes maybe 2 years prior to the release. And we are a rather small team. What I heard, maybe Assassin's Creed 2, I've been told it had maybe 400 people. We had, at least at the time, and we had 50 people. And we do the pre-production. One team does the pre-production all the way to the end. So we did announce the project quite early, and then this may make it appear. I don't deny it took long, or maybe a bit longer than we were hoping for, but it may seem like it's incredibly long. But what was good always in Alan Wake and what felt good from the day one, the project actually didn't change so much. From the very early concept designs, the end result is surprisingly similar. And I could talk to you about an hour of any of these subjects, like what's the games business today, or let's say the cinematic production pipeline alone. But I'm gonna concentrate on a few topics just because, well, the limited time, of course, and I have a good selection of material of these available. So what Alan Wake, at least in the reviews, have been very favorably talking about the concept and what is it about. How did we come to this? And rewind 5-6 years back when we had finished Max Payne. That picture on the bottom right isn't, by the way, Max Payne, but that's 97. It was the top of the line graphics at the time. But eventually how Max Payne 4 years and 2 months later came out, Max Payne 1, that's the the picture on the top right, and then obviously Max Payne 2. So it was 7 years with Mr. Payne, and we had to thought about what do we do well. We do story-driven games. We have a strong main character. These are all typical or clearly there in Max Payne. It's a third-person game. There's an action there. There's pop culture references there. Max Payne already was a sort of a combination of Hong Kong action meeting the film noir kind of storytelling. So what would we like? What fires us? You cannot make a project of like, well, at that time we didn't know, maybe 5 years, but let's say even 3 years without finding the passion and trying to find what inspires you. And assuming that you or us as a creators of the game are a good representation of the audience, then hopefully will be interesting for the audience as well. And well, what's already started kind of coming is the current TV series, if I would say TV series craze, because there's been really good TV shows appearing like on HBO. I guess HBO really started it, and obviously a lot of shows are out there already back then, and maybe if you think of really far back, one of the things which without the TV shows wouldn't be what they are today is really influential TV show, incidentally, in Pacific Northwest, Twin Peaks. And many of the American sort of small town Americana and the classic story of a maybe somewhat enclosed community, like a small town out there, God knows where, and an alien, if you will, meaning a city person. For instance, Northern Exposure is a good example of more on the comedic side of a great TV show of early 90s, which has this theme. Or even Rambo, the first movie, which is actually rather good. I did check it out just recently, and the rest of the series spoiled it, but the original idea that you have this person, which incidentally also was photographed not far from here. It was on the Canadian side, just across the border from US. So this location and the idea of small town and a TV show, which would be based on this classic thing. And obviously storytelling, mixing slightly twisted humor, but a lot of suspense. All these sounded like Twin Peaks. Then, of course, when you think of the TV shows in general, you find a lot of other examples. And for instance, X-Files. I can't understand why people don't realize this, because like it's supposed to be dark forest, but there's always this huge light just outside the screen, which is actually lighting the whole scene. That's the technology. Also, within the theme, you have these light cones or fog and really huge conifer trees and all these crowds and people and hostility which you might meet. Then great movies. Well, obviously Stephen King has placed most of his movies and books in this region, but here's relatively recent addition, Insomnia by great Christopher Nolan, and it was supposedly in Alaska, but if I remember correctly, they filmed it mostly in Washington State. And really, again, the themes, the isolated cabins, the small towns, the fog. So when we work and think about it, the concept It takes quite a long time, and it really is a painstaking process. We called the design group the sauna group, which didn't mean that we sat in the sauna, but the discussions were very heated, extensive, long. Everything has to be sorted out before you go to production, hopefully before you go to production. Obviously, we do our own tech, and this may have been one of the reasons behind a small amount of delays is the problem of the chicken and the egg. Always, like you want to create a game technology, but you rather create the game technology for a game design which you already have, but there's often certain game design aspects which you cannot verify if they really work before you have the technology where you can test it. So it's always a debate between these two, and again, Remedy creating their own technology, spending most of the early days of that 5-6 years setting up the technology, and then also refining the design. Here, for instance, myself, the lead game designer, Mikael in the middle, Sam Lake there on the left, lead programmer, Olli Tervo, producer, Jay Ranki, and Jarno Wahlgren, the lead level designer. So basically this was the design team, and when we do it together we can get a kind of clearance from all stations that this is doable and this is what we can do and this is what we want to do. There's always question like, it's not that what you can do almost anything with the computers of these days, but there's just something that takes 2 hours, 2 months, 2 years, or 20 years. Or, okay, then it wouldn't be a computer of today. But anyway, the point being that you have to find a best solution. And then you get this crazy science lab thing going on, which is a work of maybe 2-3 months and all those tiny words out there have been discussed thoroughly and may have taken 6 hours till we get one word on the paper. But this really pays off. And there you go. Talk about the concept. So we wanted a third-person thing, and after Max Payne, we definitely wanted to have a realistic center character, even more refined and layered than perhaps Max Payne had been. And it's important for creating a relation when the player, or a TV show or a film. It's always the question if you care about the characters, and we rather stay in a real life-based situation. And by getting there, that you have this character on screen is a huge amount of work, but having that real world is a really important baseline. All this requires, I'll show some more, but to get that done, you obviously have the technology, which is tremendous push. Then you have the tools, because it's always when you're doing game, it's not what you can do once, it's what you can do 100 times or 1,000 times. It's iteration. So usually you invest tremendous amount of work to your tools and to your pipeline. And let's say let's say that your technology doesn't run the game in the editor. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. You may have to press, let's say, export to get the AI, for instance, behave like it would in a real game situation. And if this takes 3 seconds versus 30 seconds, and if you do it 10 times a day, 100 times a day, how long does it take? So really finding those kind of bottlenecks in the pipeline, that's often the challenge. And here we are, for instance, from the game engine directly. We went to the Pacific Northwest. We took a lot of photographs, 60,000 of them to be precise, spent maybe 2 weeks. I drove about 3,000 kilometers myself. To know what these places look like, you need to create a believable thriller, which we are after, a kind of a show which people would care. about, we have to have that baseline, and we like to take people there and then juxtapose or add that layer of the main character's mind, if you will. When you think of Max Payne for comparison, you have this basically realistic New York, but you have this film noirish layer on top of it. Everything is a bit more gritty and dark, and when you and that's because of it's much through the style, through the main character. And here we have this in a thriller, and which we also, when we left Max Payne behind, we were always a bit troubled by the fully realistic world, because really if you shoot a guy 6 times in the head, he kind of should die. So maybe there would be a method which we could integrate in the story and tell a believable story, which would then sort of implicitly tell that there's more to this. And you have, for instance, the opposition, this slasher type of enemy. I know what you did last summer type of enemy was chosen for our kind of opposition. The dark presence, which starts gradually taking over of town of Bright Falls, is taking over people, is taking over inanimate objects, and we add that layer of kind of mental, how would I say, your subjective layer. So you have the objective world, but the layer of subjectiveness, which then everything that's related to gameplay mechanics, like light, for instance, is basically realistic. The light cone, for instance, but it's slightly stronger than a light cone would be. The flare, which is a very handy tool, by the way, because it's a 2D effect on the screen, so you can have a sort of a real-world effect servicing you in a gameplay, giving you like a kind of a HUD element. The flare then is stronger than usual. The sparks, everything, fog, smoke, all realistic effects, and what was kind of a design starting point, what should this look like, was ink dissipating into water. So we actually did do this. We had tanks of water, and we did drop a lot of ink them and checked and filmed how they dissipate and tried to imitate all this in the effects. So there you are. You have the kind of the a game. You can play the game which you may know from other mediums. It has all the inspiration that we love. It has the books. Sam Lake, our writer, for instance, names many Stephen King books as the base. We might make a nod towards the film world, like this, for instance, is Cauldron Lake Lodge, with obviously the Shining styled hedge maze. And something you would expect to find is all kind of brought there, and what we obviously try to do is to make a hybrid of a new hybrid, and hopefully make people relate to that, find it exciting, and even, let's say that my highest hope, of course, is that after all this, people wouldn't look at least when they travel to Pacific Northwest, they wouldn't look at the world quite the same way. They would kind of feel that, oh my God, this is almost like in Alan Wake, and that would be the best kind of reward for me personally, being able to do my work and our work in a way that it would give you an experience which would be so fundamentally under your skin that you couldn't kind of see the world quite the way it used to be before. So here we have, for instance, the ink, and we have the main character, the light, all the effects, the writer boy with his impractical clothing, his boots in a sort of unfriendly environment, a real life idyllic small town, which is something is going wrong with him. Real life plus the objectivity and the subjective. So when Alan Wake was designed, some of you may have seen the earlier screenshots. We had a slightly different design when we kicked off. He was maybe more of that, I would say, Jewish writer, seemed a bit more like with the glasses, Barton Fink maybe in the mind, and obviously Joel Fleischman from Northern Exposure was maybe came into mind. But as our writer Sam Lake tends to say, this character sort of started telling what to do. Eventually you kind of get to know the person. Like I would know what Max Payne, or I don't know if I would know it anymore, but back then I felt that I would know exactly what Max Payne would say. I've spent 7 years with the man. So after a while you start knowing that what this character is about, and this became a bit more edgy guy, has a temper, issue of temper, and he's a bit of this Bono type of clothing, meeting maybe Russell Crowe, where he kind of gets angry to the paparazzis and what have you. So you have, obviously he's been having trouble in the work and not being able to create a lot of time. Maybe the beard is because of that, maybe a bit scruffy look still, dark under the eyes, etc., etc. And here, for instance, like one image, how would we define this character? He's good at his work, determined, but exhausted, trying to fight, trying to cope, and hopefully taking the player also there, like that I want to take this character and help him out. A lot of work. We had about 24 characters which were more or less really well modeled. Of course, we started with, okay, we won't go more than with 6, like really carefully modeled, and then we have about, 18 or so, which are like, we never have a close-up of them. And indeed, I think we have 24 characters in the cinematics of which we have close-up eventually. It never happens. So, well, there you could say that the earlier design process didn't work so well, and when you want to take the camera close and be on the character's skin, then you realize that, whoops, okay. So we do all the layers, we cast really carefully. We have real, actual people always present the characters. In this case, we're very lucky to have Ilkka Villi for Alan Wake, and here this character was not included to at least in this form and shape. It was at the time there was this dream sequence or idea where his evil twin brother or so, or maybe the successful Alan Wake, who's always slick and handles the situations, seems to be around. So this was that version of him, and we obviously photograph all the layers, the wrinkles, what have you. So teeth, eyes, underneath everything. We don't use 3D scanners. I think we might, because they're in the future, because they're getting better and better all the time. But the fact is that you cannot create a game character from a 3D scan directly. There's always the topology and everything, the animation system supporting the skeletons, the skinning. Everything has to be taken into account, and scanners just don't produce the correct results. So we took about 20,000 photographs of the characters in total. So I don't know how many characters appeared, how many characters, a few dozen characters appear, maybe a couple of dozen of them are really carefully modeled, and then there you maybe have 400 photos, 500 photos of each, or something like that. An example, for instance, a late casting for Alice. There's always a character who's like easy to do. Barry was that. There's always a character who's terribly difficult to do, and Alice was that. Alan Wake himself kind of emerged pretty painlessly also, but obviously obviously not nearly as easily as Barry, for example. It was immediately clear what Barry had to do and what was he like. We do model them very high res, but this is Mudbox, so obviously we cannot take this in runtime, so we use this to bake normal maps. Here's also the jacket in high resolution with all the wrinkles and everything painted in, but then we have to go and use that only for normal mapping, and I hope in the future maybe displacement mapping might be something that gets developed better. Characters need technology, they need lighting to be heroic. Here, for instance, this is an example of the gazillion different technologies that we've developed. This is the cinematic lighting system, which we can use runtime also, but usually we use this in a custom scenes. For instance, in cinematics, you can have the classical tree lights system, and then of course all the shaders. We do have the subsurface scatterings and what have you underneath in the shaders. In game, usually you don't go that close. You create different systems, and here's an example of like this would be realistic, for instance, and but this is a movie sort of, or a movie realism is our goal. So remembering that X-Files, which has those huge lights just off screen lighting up the nightly scenes, we do have these unexplained lights which try to fish out the character from the background and give them more kind of interesting look, and just like a TV show or a movie would do. Then you do a lot of work also. We have a system called Face Effects, which requires us to model, I don't know, 20, 30 target poses for a variety of facial gestures. And we can use this runtime, so there's a bunch of like combined faces, and then there's like small stuff like just this eye or just this eyelid, or so you kind of use the sliders to create the target poses, and then the system also handles the in-game speech fairly well right from the box when you have invested all this time to the character. So that's a lot of work too, and we had all the reference gestures from all the actors. We have a bunch of faces that you need to do, and then the photographs, and we follow them. Well, there's some stuff about characters. Talk about world, few things. This is my mental image, which I drew fairly early at the design. Maybe I'll use this so people see it maybe more clearly. So after this 3000, which is the 3000 kilometer drive, which is drawn here, for instance, really going south to Oregon and all the way to Washington, taking a lot of photographs. This was the mental map that I had in my mind. So you have sort of the kind of moisture area here. You have the mountain range here, which blocks all the moisture. So you have the dry areas, the deserts on this side, the steppe, if you will. You have the crater lake in the south. You have dams and tall mountains here in the north. There's Columbia River is separating Washington and Oregon. So, and there's this Olympic Peninsula, which is a kind of natural park in front of the kind of Seattle area, for instance, which is here. So it's like condensed Pacific Northwest. We have a river, we have a crater lake, a caldera of a volcano. This is a highly volcanic activity here. A lot of it here, and some people may remember the 1980 big eruption here at St. Helens, which I don't know, killed maybe 50 people or so and created this huge mud flow and whatnot. But this, for instance, is what I started with when we designed the world. Of course, then the photographing, 60,000 photographs, several trips. designs, ideas, 10 by 10 kilometers roughly. Distances, maybe my architectural background shows in this, like thinking in big scale. The mountains, how you would see certain mountains across. This was the idea where you have the sort of arena. So it's about 2 kilometers of mountains. So when a player would be in an area, the idea was that there's sort of very large rooms, and then you have doorways to next arena, like a range of mountains surrounding you, and you would then have interesting layers of environment, always the visibility of like layers after layers, and also that the player wouldn't like use the mountains for blocking for player access, etc., or the mental blocking, if you, no pun intended, meaning that you wouldn't consider like that's not the direction I want to go this way. And then mapping in a very same way all the vegetation, like we had all the vegetation we have in game is correct to the location and also correct to the each vegetation type. So we have the mountain range here in the middle, and then more moist and more dry, etc. And our landscape architect / lead level designer Jarno has created these maps, how they really work. So there we are. This is where we ended. So the Cauldron Lake, the Columbia River, if you will, the Olympic Peninsula, sort of hybrid of everything. And here, for instance, if you would follow the game, we don't obviously show it all. You don't get to play all the moments. It's a narrative story also. So, but you can follow the principal's paths during the about 2 weeks time, which the game sort of takes, supposedly takes. So, for instance, Alice and Wake arrive to Bright Falls with the ferry in the beginning of game. They go to diner. They drive across this bridge. This is in cinematic. Some of this you play. Some of it you just see in a cinematic. They drive here to the Cauldron Lake and on a diver island, which isn't visible here. Who has played the game know it or know why, but I won't give out too much. But here's, for instance, the vista, which is here. This is just I took this as an example. So you have the bird leg cabin, which whoever has played knows what it is. It's a place which the main characters, Alice and Wake, or Alice and Alan Wake, are coming and suspecting that they will be having a holiday. Here you have, for instance, a vista, which is also deliberate. There you see the Cauldron Lake Lodge. For instance, the real Crater Lake, which you find from Oregon, has a lodge, a kind of a hotel on the side. So we have this big old volcanic lake, a caldera, which also has a lodge, our own version. And obviously it takes inspiration from that shining hotel, overlook hotel as well. So you have vistas and certain designs, and this should bring your mind maybe to a bird or something like that. This is some of my designs. So over the course of the game, you have vistas here. This is very high, and for instance, there's this direct access from the top of the tallest mountain, the Mirror Peak, which is right here, right across the eyes of the house to the sun clock of the Cauldron Lake Lodge, cross that building and ending in a location in a town which I will not reveal, or which won't be revealed in Alan Wake 1, where it's heading. So maybe in the future you will know what this axis is about. But these kind of designs you need to do. The bird leg cabin is a nod towards Baba Yaga, this witch of Slavic and Russian folklore, which or who supposedly lives in a cabin which has bird legs, and they suspect this is a real storage house of the Sami people from the north. This is from Wikipedia directly. You would find this kind of there. So that story has influenced our story, and we wanted to make the bird leg cabin to kind of be. It's always the question, like when you're doing psychological thriller, where the player has to have enough doubt that this may be true, but maybe I'm coming crazy. Maybe the world is real and it's just in my head. That did that cabin move? And at one point during the design, we actually had the cabin, even the consideration if cabin should move, and we felt that that was too much. Maybe adding a very large bird footprints near the cabin and have the cabin change place, but never really you would see that it's maybe a bird. But even that felt too much. So the final version is quite kind of, this image, for instance, indicated that it would look rather stupid to have a cabin with legs. And in this real-world setting with the psychological thriller background, it's too fantasy-like. So we ended up making it move only in a mental way, if you will. If you play the game, you will realize what it means. But the good thing about the bird leg cabin inside, here's the study, is that you also the eyes, the round windows, give you immediate indication of where you are, because this becomes an important place. So there we go. Here's another picture of the bird leg cabin and the diver island and the cauldron lake. So that's for environment. Then I will show another video later, which again we spent some time putting it together, but it is nicely encapsulated. It's the technology part also. But I'd like to talk about one aspect of technology which is not mentioned in the video, sort of behind the scenes thinking, is the camera. But when you think of Alan Wake itself, like the technology, you create all this, obviously the lighting, the everything, and the subjectiveness, which you might see here, the lights more volumetric than they would be, and the flares are a bit too bright and everything. What we wanted to create was this, I personally was very much after this documentary style, because obviously you would like also to maybe Blair Witch Project or modern TV storytelling quite often has this documentary style camera use. So this is an interactive medium after all, and we cannot do just TV show type of camera without thinking of how the player experiences this. This is a game. So this leads to a very, very long kind of a design session where we thought about how this is like 2003 or 2001. This is Max Payne 1 camera, basically. You have a third-person camera in a rigid position, sort of a boom around the main character's head usually, or pelvis perhaps, which is the animation 0 point. And it's a very playable thing, but let's take this to next generation. Let's think about how could we make this more engaging, and we're after TV series after all. So without sacrificing any of the playability, could we move the game camera lower and maybe over the shoulder, which would be already like somebody would be shooting over your shoulder, a documentary guy. But the thing is that it's still too rigid, and so enter the idea of virtual cameraman. This is my concept render of a few years back, 3 years maybe, where you have this idea of safe zones, like a real cameraman tries to compose the image. Classically, you have divide the screen to sort of 1/3 and 1/3, and possibly keep if you're behind a person, you put the other important thing into 1/3 and the focal point into another third. So you can see it here, for instance, keep the character in this third and the focal point in this third. So what this is now from the player perspective. So already a guy who is shooting you falls behind and tries to catch up when you stop, etc. So this is already doing the movement. When a player makes the character move forward, the camera is like, oh, he started moving, okay, I'll try to follow. I try to catch up, oh, he stopped, I'll almost run too close and come right over the shoulder, and then gradually I compose the image to be the optimal, but there's these errors. Yet kind of the aiming point in the middle should stay as it is. I'll show. Maybe we'll skip this rerun and show it in the game. So I personally wanted to come even closer, but for gameplay purposes this distance felt the best. And then when you aim and focus like now, we move over the shoulder. But generally the image is composed either by so that the character is in this third and the focal point stays in this third. And if you move quickly enough, the cameraman is lazy, so if it's a he doesn't run to the other side and try to keep the composition. He stays put and lets the composition mirror, which is actually very transparent. Here and then a real cameraman would, for instance, when a character moves, the composition rules tells you that you should compensate the movement and try to show more space on the direction the character is moving. So here I raise the compensation value, and when you start running, the camera over time shows more of that side where you're heading. So it's playable and it's realistic what a cameraman would do. So you have kind of two systems working. One is the positioning, which handles like a real camera would do, and you have the pointing, the aiming, which again composes it like a real person would do. And try to make this as transparent and as effortless as possible and keep the aiming position, which for playability purposes is visible. And very good thing about Wake is the fact that we use the light cone for aiming, so you have a very good tool for aiming. Actually having the camera on the side a little bit and showing that cone is favorable to the player, so it's even better. And also when you think of the composition, you think of the dynamic feel for the player. When the character starts moving, the initial movement direction in screen composition is towards that direction where you moved your joystick or whatever, your D-pad. Here we have the system from outside. This green thing I'll freeze the camera to show you like so, and now you see from outside the composition mechanism. So that's where the camera is there, making sure it doesn't collide, and when you aim and it comes close and it becomes more rigid, and it's almost like the cameraman is also more excited because you are excited. And then it also allows to do more without annoying the player, we're making a game, above all a game which has TV show and cinematic influence, but we will not make a game which looks like a movie. So try to think, this is very much the Remedy way. Try to think what in our inspiration is the core, think about it and try to bring it to medium of games in a way that it works for games. Let me finish this with technical featurette. Some of you may have seen it already. It's similar, bit shorter than you saw before, and I think the end is the most important thing. No matter how many years we spend on doing the, well, let the man say it.
To ensure
Excuse me. Let's start from the top.
the technology behind Alan Wake is undoubtedly the biggest undertaking Remedy has ever attempted. In order to create a believable Pacific Northwest setting, Remedy wanted to be able to convey the scale of the environment. To ensure authenticity, the team began with diligent on-location research, capturing over 60,000 digital photographs and hundreds of hours of video footage. Wake's engine allows real-time modeling of large landscapes and precise control over every aspect of the game. Alan Wake has been a massive technological undertaking that fully optimizes the power of the Xbox 360 console. But creating great-looking environments was only the first step. The game's internal simulation also manages different weather conditions, as well as various lighting conditions. With different presets, the same environment can rapidly change from calm and idyllic into dark and foreboding. This allows the designers to easily modify any sequence in the game to match the intended mood and atmosphere of a scene. A lot of effort was also spent on character lighting. Full body motion capture and expression capture were used extensively throughout the project. Light is an integral gameplay element, and thus the entire technology was built to support Alan Wake's fight with light gameplay mechanic, delivering an intensely visual gaming experience. Remedy's team is passionate about creating high-end technology, but at the same time, the designers emphasize that all this technology is built with a single goal in mind: to deliver the best possible game.
There you have it. That's the end. Best possible game. Okay, thank you. Questions? Thank you. I was told that you should have the microphone in order to. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you thought of releasing the engine in similar to something like the Unreal Engine? You know, releasing a developer kit or something, because to me that seems like it's very different from any other this sort of developer kits. So yeah.
Yeah. Yes, of course we have thought about it. Back in the day, you may remember that Max Payne tools were released for the general public, and we did have quite a few nice mods. As it is now, the game is available only to Xbox 360, so the modding community, for obvious reasons, isn't out there. But that's not even the main reason why we probably will never release it. Even if you think of the tools, and really that, for instance, the World Editor is a powerhouse tool which you can use to create. A couple of people could maintain our 10 by 10 world in a very reliable fashion, and the biotype system, I skipped it this time because some of you may have seen it. I've kept a couple of presentations earlier about it. But the thing is that it's not just creating the technology. When you create all that, when you would sell it or give it out, there's support, there's continuous maintenance. Immediately when you have clients or people or somebody who would get it, it's a whole lot of different thing, and you would have this epic style company where you sometimes may have the first game which they usually have published over the years, or John Carmack's company, for instance. The game necessarily hasn't always been the most creative. It's usually something simple which like a first-person shooter or something like that, to be the technology showcase, and their main business is really to sell the technology, and to go head-to-head with that kind of competition is a completely different company. We are storytellers, we want to entertain, we want to give people experiences, and that can be more powerful. When think of Max Payne, for instance, it had created a movie, it has created many games on many platforms, so I think the story and the immaterial things can be, at best, way more powerful and more meaningful in the realm of games. I hope that answered you. Maybe one more. My chairman, please. Do I have one more? Anyone? Well, apparently, even in this short time, I managed to be conclusive enough, and there's no more questions. Okay, thank you. Yeah.